Hello explorers, thanks for joining us again and welcome back to another exciting and informative video on our YouTube channel. If you are joining us for the first time, I want to thank you for watching. In this episode, we shall be looking at the legacy of French colonialism in Africa. This video is going to be in two sections. The first part of this video, we are going to cover the French legacy in Africa. The second episode, which will be on the second video that we'll publish in the days ahead, will be about the French influence in African politics over the past few decades. So without any more delay, let's just dive straight into it. For almost a century and a half, France maintained a substantial colonial empire in Africa, stretching from the Maghreb to the western and central sub-Saharan African regions. Though direct rule ended in the early 1960s, French influence over its former possessions continued. Through political, economic, and cultural connections, France has attempted to maintain a hegemonic foothold in Francophone Africa, both to serve its interest and maintain a last bastion of prestige associated with the legacy of past mastery. However, though these relations retain an essential colonialist character, to determine this, I am going to look into the first brief. I would analyze the main rationale behind France's imperial expansion, its mission to civilize. We shall also in this video to explore France's more recent existing relationship with its former possessions.
The questions my generation is asking are the following. If I can summarize, it is that we do not understand how Africa, with so much wealth on our soil, with generous nature, water, sunshine and abundance, how Africa is today the poorest continent. Africa is a hungry continent, and how come there are heads of state all over the world begging? These are the questions we are asking ourselves, and we have no answers so far. We have the opportunity to forge new relationships, and I hope that these relationships can be the best ones to give our people a better future. My generation also asks me to say that because of this poverty, they are forced to cross the ocean to try to reach Europe. They die in the ocean, but soon they will no longer have to cross because they will come to our palaces to seek their daily bread. As far as what concerns Burkina Faso today, for more than 8 years we've been confronted with the most barbaric and the most violent form of imperialist neocolonialism. Slavery continues to impose itself on us. Our predecessors taught us one thing: a slave who cannot assume his own revolt does not deserve to be pitied. We do not feel sorry for ourselves. We do not ask anyone to feel sorry for us. The people of Burkina Faso have decided to fight against terrorism in order to relaunch their development.
We have made lots of videos on this particular channel. If you are new here, we encourage you to check the entire channel for you to see more exciting and educating content regards the global African perspective. Without any more delay, let's just dive straight into it. If you consider French influence in African politics over the past few decades, France has good cause to seek to improve its image in Africa. Resentment has built up due to political interference and armed intervention, not least the legacy of the 1994 Rwanda genocide. French forces facilitated the training and expansion of the Forces Armées Rwandaises from 1990 to 1993 and provided huge shipment of arms. Though stabilization was the chief motivation, France effectively, if not unwittingly, helped militarize Rwanda's prior to pre-planned massacre. Shocked at those events and growing chorus of humanitarian advocacy in France civil society have led to the recent government reforming the terms of their African military cooperation and engagement. As noted with regards to my analysis, France has been amicably to settle some withdrawal, such as the pull out of over 12,000 troops and transfer of their sovereignty to Senegal in 2010, yet still retain the will and capacity to intervene, as demonstrated in Ivory Coast when French forces long in theater under the Force Lacombe assisted in overthrowing Laurent Gbagbo at the time. Ultimately, France has successfully used its security presence since decolonization to exert influence in countries where it has interest, maintaining both regional hegemony and its vision of order and stability. While that strength is still potent, strategic rationales for maintaining substantial presence and weakening its addition to the very French importance with regards to dealing with other African countries, as the public opinion is shaping differently with regards to France's presence in the continent of Africa. By the African Union forming and creating in 2004 the new African Peace and Security Council in its effect to stand by itself to help Africa solve its own security issues, France perceived this new option as something that will bring in some roadblocks regards its operation in the continent of Africa. France has also considerable military presence in Africa. Decolonization did not mark the end of France's presence in Africa, but rather restructuring of the imperial relationship. And as we all see that Franc-Afrique, the political, security and economic and cultural relationship, though diminished somewhat, remains today still in different aspects. Additionally, 60 years on, Francophone countries in Africa still do not have true independence and freedom from France. If you consider this other aspect in different ways, from Ivory Coast to Guinea and other African countries, some have beginning to sever the relationship. The more importantly, the political system in many of those countries was introduced by France shortly before independence. France decided to abolish the parliamentary system in some countries like Ivory Coast and introduce a presidential regime in which all territories and powers are in the hands of the head of state. If you consider this aspect, only one person with the power needs to be manipulated. France-Afrique, a French influence in former colonies, is called in different aspects, remain intact, particularly galling to young, and resentment has increased in different areas in France. Beginning in the 1980s, many French presidential candidates have been announced the plans to put in the end of France-Afrique, but nothing has been done so far for many years.
Burkina Faso's interim leader Ibrahim Traoré, who actually is wearing a hat harkening back to previous Burkina Faso leader Thomas Sankara, who was assassinated. But Nick Turse, if you can talk about what he is saying, and it's also interesting this happened at the Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg that Putin addressed. Far fewer leaders from Africa came than last time.
That's right. I actually spoke with a few sources of mine in Burkina Faso over the last couple of days. I've done some significant reporting there over the past years. And, I've heard from some that speech really resonated a great deal, that the anti-colonialist bent of it, made a big impact on people. They thought it was a really strong speech. There is a great deal of resistance to French neocolonialism that the French colonialists passed there.
In reviewing and finalizing this particular episode in looking at different ways, the main goal of colonialization with West Africa was to turn West African countries into French states. This means changing their way of living, making the official language French, and making them convert to Christianity. French colonization changed African culture, but today France's army keeps its grips on African ex-colonies. After 150 years of French colonization of Central African Republic, there was only the one person with a doctorate degree when the country became independent in 1960. Most French colonies in Africa are still under French rule and culture of assimilation. These stooges are the king of the democratic dictatorship, which is why those people are fleeing their homes. Simply 14 African countries are still forced by France to pay colonial tax for benefits of slavery and colonization. 80% of the 10 countries with the lowest literacy rates in the world among adults are in Francophone Africa. France continues to collect rents on the colonial buildings they have left in those countries. It is estimated that those African countries pay over $500 billion as colonial tax to France each year. In short, until France leaves Africa, economic hegemony and coups will continue. French presence in Africa dates to the 17th century, but the main period of colonial expansion expansion came in the 19th century with the invasion of the Ottoman Arges in 1830, conquest in West Equatorial Africa during the so-called the Scramble for Africa, and the establishment of the Protectorate in Tunisia and Morocco in the decades before the First World War. To these were added part of German Togo and Cameroon, assigned to France as League of Nations mandate after World War II. By 1930, French colonial Africa encompasses the vast confederation of French West Africa and French Equatorial Africa, the Western Maghreb, the Indian Ocean islands of Madagascar, Réunion, and the Comoros, and Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. Within this African empire, territories in sub-Saharan Africa were treated primarily as colonies to exploit, while a settlers' colonial model guided colonization efforts in the Maghreb. Although only Algeria drew European immigrants throughout Africa, French rule was characterized by sharp contradictions between the rhetoric commitment to civilization of indigenous people through cultural, political, and economic reform, and the harsh realities of violent conquest, economic exploitation, legal inequalities, and sociocultural disruption. At the same time, French domination was never as complete as the solid blue swatch on maps of Great France would suggest.
ECOWAS did not speak out in all of the cases of their coups. Do you think that has emboldened the junta in Niger to take over? And what would an ECOWAS intervention look like? And if you can talk about how ECOWAS has seen the African military alliance in Africa.
Absolutely. That was what I mentioned in the piece, which I wrote earlier in the week, where I stated that one of the reasons for this coup was because ECOWAS did not really do anything significant to deter other countries from the militaries from other countries from taking power. So when the coups in Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali happened, there were a couple of sanctions issued against the military regime, but nothing further was done. But we need to put this in context. One reason why Niger is quite different, in addition to the country being allied to the US, the France, is also the fact that Niger has land border with 7 different African countries. So whatever happens in Niger impacts significantly on many countries in the Sahel and in West Africa. So this is why it is more of interest than the other 3 countries.
As in all empires, colonized people throughout French Africa developed strategies to resist or evade France's authority, or coped up so-called civilized missions and coped with upheavals of occupation. After the First World War, new and more organized forms of contestations emerged as Western educated reformers, nationalists, and trade unions pressed by a variety of means for a more equitable distribution of political and administrative powers. Frustrated in the interwar period, the demands for change spurred the process of decolonization. After a Second World War effort by French authorities, some African leaders replaced imperial rule with a federal organization failed and followed the 1958 constitutional referendum. Almost all French territories in sub-Saharan Africa claimed their independence. In North Africa, Tunisia and Morocco nationalists were able to face the French to negotiate independence in 1950s. But decolonization in Algeria, with its million European settlers, came only after a protracted and brutal war that left deep scars in both post-colonial states. Although former French rule in Africa had ended by 1962, the ties in forged continued to shape relations between France and its colonial territories throughout the continent.
As an American reporter on Africa, what is the American press and overall the press missing when it comes to understanding what's happening here and what can happen?
Well, I think a lot of times we're missing deep context on this. One thing that really stood out to me, the Washington Post yesterday published an op-ed by the deposed head of state in Niger, President Bazoum. And, he talks about it being the last bastion of democracy in the Sahel. When I was there earlier this year, I did not find it the most democratic state. If you read State Department reports, you'll see that there are tremendous amounts of abuses of the citizenry there. The military that we've been backing for years has conducted a tremendous amount of atrocities. And this has built a great deal of ill will within the military itself and within the civilian population. And I think what's missing is that type of context, the understanding of what pumping all of this money into the security apparatus in the Sahel has meant for the people there.
I want to thank you for watching. If you are new to this channel, we encourage you to subscribe and share our videos with your different network. Let us know if you are from one of those countries in Africa that France is continuing its colonial aspect. Let us know as well if this is something that you consider is holding most of these African countries behind. If you are new to this channel, we encourage you to check some of our informative video on this channel. Help us grow the channel, subscribe and share the video with your different network. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.